Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Agers, and I am the director of the Institute for Child Development and Family Relations. The ICDFR supports child development and healthy families through research and education, and by providing services and resources to families in the inland region. As we are all well aware, the challenges from COVID-19 have hit families hard. Financial pressures, the loss of social structures and support, increased childcare and homeschooling responsibilities for parents, and the general increase in uncertainty and stress around day-to-day life. These are things that only begin to capture our COVID-19 reality. As the scope of these challenges has become more clear, the ICDFR sought to be a resource for families by using social media and online mediums like this webinar to reach out to families and to share science, research, and best practice tips and guidance in a format that is clear, accessible, and easy to implement in your own lives. I invite you to check out our content on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, but I am thrilled today, right now, that we have a panel of child development and family relations experts to share with you their wisdom, their expertise, and to answer your questions. Our panel includes 4 members of the faculty at California State University, San Bernardino. Each is an expert in some aspect of healthy child development and family relations, and has committed much of their career to working to make a positive difference for children and families. These are all difference makers, and it is a great honor for me to work with them through the ICDFR. In a moment, I will introduce each of the panelists, and then they'll take some time to share from their expertise. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's panelists. Dr. Kelly Campbell is a professor of psychology at California State University, San Bernardino. Her research examines couple relationships and friendships, including deceptive online romance, known as catfishing, infidelity, instant connections like chemistry, and love. She teaches courses on intimate relationships, gender, families, parenting, positive psychology, personality, and race and racism. Dr. Amy Van Schagen is an associate professor specializing in early childhood development and improving learning environments for young children. She is also director of the MA Child Development Program here at Cal State. Prior to her current position, she taught young children for almost 5 years. Dr. Laura Kamptner is a professor of child development in the psychology department here at CSUSB. She teaches courses in child human development, child guidance, parenting, and the history of childhood. For the last 25 years, she has developed and implemented research-based parent education programs in the local region, including the county jail system. Her research interests focus on the impact of early parenting on later outcomes, including mental health. And Dr. Eugene Wong, also a professor of psychology and a licensed psychologist in the state of California. His research interests focus on 2 primary areas. First, his community-based work, known as Building Executive Functioning for Academic Success Training, or BFAST, examines the efficacy of cognitive training programs in supporting the development of executive function among students in the K-12 setting. Dr. Wong's second area of research focuses on teaching pedagogy in the university setting. In particular, he collaborates with colleagues to develop teaching practices that are the basis of highly effective learning space, like the college classroom. So I want to thank each of our panelists. Welcome. Thank you for taking time for joining us today and sharing your wisdom. And so let's begin. I'll turn it over to Dr. Kelly Campbell.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be with you today. I'll be talking to you about couple relationships during this stressful time period during the COVID pandemic. I've organized my talk into kind of 2 sections. I'll start with relationships that would be considered in the earlier phases, so dating and moving into the cohabiting phase, and then I'll transition to more long-term marital relationships. And then I'll end with some general tips for all couples. So in terms of those who are not yet partnered up, this has been a unique time period. I'm not going to go into great depth about the uniqueness of online dating right now, but obviously it's taken center stage in a way that it hadn't before. It was already popular, but it became a necessity for those who want to meet people. I'll just refer you to this webinar that you can watch where I discussed it at length, and you can email me if you'd like a copy of the link. I can send it to you. But I will say one thing that is particularly relevant and worth underscoring is that whether you're dating in the virtual context or not, the best advice I can give is to know yourself before you start to date so that you can set up your boundaries. And this really applies to this new context we find ourselves in, where people are dating virtually. So not only meeting their partners online, but actually having their dates in a virtual context. So know what your boundaries are and don't cross those boundaries. Know if you're comfortable sending certain types of photos to another via text, or what you're comfortable doing in a Zoom context, and stick to those values and stick to those boundaries. Okay. The other thing I'll mention here is that it has been a time, we know from some research that's been done, where exes are reaching out of loneliness to connect with their former partners. Remember that you broke up for a reason. It's okay to say hi and be cordial, but try not to let the context of the pandemic make you go down a road that you might not otherwise go down. You broke up for a reason, and keep that in mind. An interesting finding is that couples who were long distance prior to the pandemic had actually developed skills for coping and connecting with one another that are serving them well during this time. Whereas other partnerships that were more recently formed and are still developing, they didn't have those skills yet. And many of those relationships were, as they say, stopped in their tracks when this hit. So one suggestion for those developing relationships has been to potentially form a quarantine bubble if you're not long distance, if it's really just the pandemic keeping you apart. And that way you can allow the relationship to progress further even during this time. Of course, you have to trust your partner in order to have that bubble be safe and secure. This is an interesting concept, the concept of sliding. So what this means is this is where partners move in together out of economic necessity, and this has become especially salient during the pandemic. And so with people losing jobs, for example, partnerships that might not otherwise have decided to move in together, those partners are electing to do so. And it's a bit premature in terms of their relationship stage. This can happen outside of the pandemic too. So certainly, let's say students might be struggling economically and want to move in together out of economic necessity. The problem with this is that it makes it more difficult to break up, and that some relationships might stay together that are not really the most healthy together. So you want to be mindful of that. You also want to realize the challenges that come with it. When you're not used to living together and it's a bit premature, your independence could be stifled. You could end up in a lot of conflicts that you wouldn't otherwise have. For many couples, research is showing that violence is occurring when it otherwise would not occur. So it's not an at-risk partnership otherwise, but because of the circumstances of the pandemic, we do see higher rates of domestic violence. And so the suggestion there is to make sure you're managing your conflict well, and I'll get into a bit more of that. But definitely take those time outs for at least 45 minutes. That's the time it takes you to physiologically calm down and not have your emotions get in the way, and then you can address conflicts more effectively. Moving into more long-term relationships, research is showing that those who've been together over a span of years and marital relationships, they tend actually not to have much decrease in their relationship satisfaction during this time period as we thought they would. They're not experiencing a dramatic decline, but they are having some additional, I guess you could say, annoyances from spending so much time together, that those things, you know, just little things bothering them that they otherwise wouldn't have noticed during regular times. And then of course, economic stress, which shouldn't be thought of as something minor. It is a major stressor, but these couples that are more long-term do have some skills for navigating through that. And for the most part, they're doing okay. One domain that they are suffering is their sex life. And so I do have some suggestions on the next slide for spicing things up a little bit there, but just know that that's to be expected, and it's across many couples are having these same kind of stressors. But the biggest challenge is the domains where we're seeing people really struggling. It's when we have couples with children, and there's a lot to balance there and renegotiate in this time period, and also couples where violence is something that characterizes their relationship. So a few things I'd like to highlight here. The first one is recognizing that the stressors you're experiencing, you could say it's the stressors, like it's them, it's not you. Just a recognition of the fact that there is something really traumatic and major going on right now. And if it weren't going on, you wouldn't be having as many challenges as you're having. Just that simple recognition is important. Another thing I'd like to highlight is if you're finding maladaptive conflict resolution in your relationship, read up on how to develop those skills. And I've put on the left there a little graph that's showing some of Gottman's work. So if you need some skill development, look up John Gottman's work. It's research-based. It's excellent in terms of giving suggestions for bad conflict and then good conflict resolution strategies. So you need to learn and develop those skills. And then those timeouts again, very important when you're in the heat of the moment and you feel like you could be on the verge of something violent. Definitely you need to take those timeouts and then develop an exit plan. If you are really in a domestic violent situation, try to get a therapist, broaden your social support network, recruit the assistance of friends and family, and develop an exit plan. Economic strain is keeping partners together right now that might otherwise divorce. And keep in mind that because of that, you may be in a household where you're starting to experience emotional and physical distance from one another, and that will be affecting the children. So do your best to keep things going as strong and as positively as possible with those good conflict resolution strategies until the time comes where you can separate in a more amicable way. Just some general tips. Remember your self-care, taking care of yourself, including finding some anxiety reduction techniques such as mindfulness. Get a therapist if you need one. They're doing Zoom sessions or by phone. Set up those work boundaries, especially when you're working from home. Don't let work take over your life and just let it run through all the hours of the day. You need some boundaries around that. Share the childcare and homeschooling tasks with your partner. In fact, one of the biggest predictors of women's satisfaction in relationships, whether during pandemic or not, is when men share those tasks 50-50 with them. Do your part to stay positive. Those are called relationship maintenance behaviors if you want to look them up. But negativity spreads and so does positivity. Avoid alcohol, drugs, and substances that may be affecting things like increased violence. Using purposeful connection. So if your sex life is suffering, it doesn't have to be all about sex. It can be about holding hands, expressing I love you, expressing love in different ways. Exercise, get outside, that fresh air, do it with the family. It's very important to maintain your good health and changing context. You're in the house all the time. Try to get out for a walk if you can, every day, ideally. Engaging in novel activities with your partner will stimulate passion. So try to do new things together, plan date nights at home, something different. And then keeping that social support network broad. So spending time with friends and family, even if virtually, because we tend to have an over-reliance on our partners to fulfill all our needs. And that can really take a toll on the relationship. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Kamptner, and she will discuss parenting.
Great. Hi, everybody. As Kelly was just saying, we're really in uncharted territory these days. Parents especially are being asked to do the impossible. Parents are running on empty, and so many families are struggling with job losses, financial hardship, and the loss of so many important parts of their pre-COVID lives. And children are struggling too. And my PowerPoint has some suggestions, and hopefully some of these tips will be helpful to people. So slide. First off, some key parenting tips. One of the most important things is to let the little stuff go, lower your expectations, and try to focus on what's most important. Think about the physical health and safety of your family members, and also the emotional health of all your family members. And related to that is my second point here, attend to children's and teens' emotions. Listen for and discuss feelings. With very young children, help them to label their emotions. And I think it's also helpful to know what some of the sources of stress are for children. These include changes in their schooling, and they're experiencing losses too, particularly among their peer relationships, sports, and other after-school activities that have been a part of their lives. And some of the signs of stress in children include changes in sleep and appetite, acting out behavior problems, perhaps more conflict with siblings, also the loss of interest in schooling and other activities, and more meltdowns. And some of the kinds of things that can help when children are overly stressed is to talk about feelings and engage in joint problem solving with them. My third point here is communication. The more you can talk out things among family members that come up, the better. It's important to talk with children about the COVID situation instead of keeping them in the dark. It's also helpful to use this as a teaching moment. Talk about and read books on germs and viruses. Another teaching moment is the idea that pandemics have been a part of human history. Humans have been dealing with this since the beginning of time. That helps kids and teenagers to understand that this is something that's happened before. Also talk to children about what they can do to stay safe. And as I mentioned, engage in joint problem solving with issues that come up. My fourth point is we've all had to struggle with creating a new routine and structure. Routines are really important for kids because it gives them a sense of predictability of what's coming next. And these days are so different. And we've also all had to restructure our lives given how so many things have changed, including our lifestyles. My last point here on this slide is to plan fun stuff to do outside the house. When we change environments, that changes our mood. And the more you can plan fun experiences, that generates more positive feelings among families. And as Kelly was saying too, getting outside, exercising, nature is also very healing. My husband and I, our little guy is now grown and in college, but my husband and I still love to go up to Oak Glen to walk around and just to be out in a safe place to walk and experience nature. So they have a little sign up at Oak Glen that says how healing and wonderful nature is. So they've tried to keep their walking areas open. Slide, please. For a couple of tips for homeschooling, first off, know what's expected by the child's teacher and try to stay in communication. And if something's unclear, try to get that clarified. Second, it's important again to make a schedule and have a daily routine, taking into consideration children's attention span, whether they work better in the morning, afternoon, or evening. Try to be flexible if you can. And also with kids, it's important to build in breaks and social time with friends, whether it's video chatting or some other safe way to experience their friendships. My fourth point is to try to set up a dedicated space for children. If they have their own space to do their schoolwork, it helps to keep things organized and locating a place that's clutter-free and distraction-free is also helpful. My fifth point here is that each child is unique. If you have more than one child in the house, different kids have different attention spans. Some work better at different parts of the day, and some children need more supervision than others. And so try to be flexible and tailor each child's schooling time as best you can. And the sixth point is that be flexible and don't beat yourself up. Online schooling is simply not the same as a classroom experience. There was an article in the LA Times a couple of days ago called "Distance Learning Gets an F." And it outlines some of the frustrations that parents are having in trying to homeschool their children, including how to motivate their kids, how to sustain their kids' interest and attention, the frustration of little instructional time with teachers, and not understanding assignments. So if you're frustrated, you have a lot of company out there. And one other suggestion I'd like to make along these lines is that there are things that you can do in the home with children that are very much terrific learning experiences. For example, even when kids are independent readers, continue to read books to them on topics that they enjoy. Play board games with them. Board games require planning and strategies, counting and turn taking. Cooking with kids is great science and math. And there are also, my son loves science since he was a little kid, and there are great resources online for science activities. So a lot of things during the course of the day are also terrific learning experiences. Slide, please. When it comes to parents who are working, bringing their work inside the home or working outside the home and combining that with schooling and family life, people are really reaching the breaking point here. Without childcare and schools open, parents are really expected to do the impossible, to be the teacher, the IT tech, the chef, the caregiver, full-time employee, housekeeper, etc. And the stress seems to be especially acute among mothers who are either working from home or working outside the home. I was looking at a study this weekend that showed that married mothers during COVID are doing double the household chores and parenting compared to married fathers. And many are so stressed that they're leaving the workforce altogether, or taking a leave of absence, or trying to job share. So one recommendation would be for all the adults in the house that are able to equally share household chores and parenting. The second point, again, is to create a new family schedule and routine for parents who are working inside or outside the home. One suggestion has been to divide the daytime into different shifts, morning, afternoon, and evening, and assign different adults, if there's more than one adult in the home, schooling of kids, meals, childcare, and other kinds of things. So at least when you do have need to work from home, that you will have some hopefully stress-free times. Third, in the literature, it also recommends having a designated workspace for everyone. And fourth, communicate with everyone and take breaks. And finally, a few tips for saving your sanity. Many of these are similar to what Kelly was just mentioning. First off, admit and share feelings about loss and how life is different. All of our lives have changed dramatically, and human beings do not like change. So admitting it, talking about your frustrations, and trying to do some creative problem solving is helpful. One of the things that I've kind of enjoyed seeing through all this, that's probably the only thing, is how creative people are being in terms of turning restaurants into outdoor eating areas, and coming up with all sorts of other creative solutions to what this pandemic has imposed. Self-care is very important. If you don't take care of yourself as a parent, that stress gets translated into stress for children. And again, 3, planning fun things to do each day. Getting out of the house, again, if possible, exercise, communing with nature, planning fun family time. The weather's cooling off a little bit, and this is a great time to explore parks in your area. Again, as I mentioned, my husband and I love to go up to Oak Glen. There are pumpkin patches where people can safely practice social distancing. But getting out of the house, particularly in the afternoon, if you can, will help change the mood and give everybody something to look forward to. Fourth is having a new schedule or routine, as I've mentioned several times, and planning out each day, and checking in with partners and spouses in the evening to go over what one's expectations and needs are the next day can help give a little bit more predictability. Fifth, creating a parent support circle or network so that parents can share frustrations and engage in and share problem solving. And 6 is lower your expectations. We're all being asked to do the impossible, and it's just not going to be as easy as it was in the past. And finally, know that we will all get through this. And just to kind of sum up, one of the key points in all of the literature that I've been reviewing is this is a stressful time. We're all experiencing a lot of loss and stress. Create a new routine and schedule that works for you. Lower your expectations and make sure to carve out self-care time for yourself. And communication, and then finally just trying to get out of the house and do something different and go explore some new areas in town. So that's all that I have, and I'll turn it over to Amy.
Thank you so much. So much helpful information already coming down the pipeline from Dr. Campbell and Dr. Kamptner. I'm going to be focusing in on young children. Specifically, I'm talking about birth to about 3 to 4 years old. So I just wanted to give a rundown of kind of the key topics I'll be covering. So I'm going to kind of start with the foundation of childcare challenges, some new data, then connection and supporting development during the pandemic, providing positive guidance strategies that can be used, as well as some coping strategies for young children. Slide. So I had the privilege of working with some of my colleagues from across the US to gather some new data. So shortly after COVID initially kind of hit all of us, we created a survey. And so what we really are seeing from that data is that there have been large increases in the burden that's put on parents for caring for young children. You can kind of see in the table, pre-COVID, about 36% of about 1,200 families reported that their partner and themselves share responsibilities, and that increased almost double to 60% during COVID currently. And then the amount of children involved in childcare programs, whether that's family-based, center-based, basically care outside of the home, was about 28% prior to COVID and has dropped to 3%, with almost 0% in actual center-based care based on the families that we sampled. Additionally, we've also seen that there are little work supports to accommodate for childcare responsibilities. So although there's a higher burden on parents providing care for young children, they haven't seen a shift in their workplace accommodating for these childcare responsibilities. Slide. So as you can imagine, you may be spending a lot more time with your young children than you did prior to COVID if you're staying home and working virtually, or don't have consistent care outside of the home for your children. And so still things need to get done around the house, typical things, even if we don't like doing them, like laundry or cooking. But I wanted to talk some about how development can be really supported for all domains, even in daily tasks. So for example, with cooking, there are so many opportunities to incorporate math and science, as well as sensory items. So counting the amount of scoops of cereal, for example, you're putting into a bowl, or describing the smells of different ingredients, having children get involved in helping measure those out, even talking about food groups as you're making the meal. So really being vocal about what you're doing in those daily tasks. That's also going to increase the amount of language that children are exposed to. And we know that that's really critical for young children. The more words that they're exposed to, that also increases the amount of words that they understand, and also the amount of words that they're able to express over time. So it becomes incredibly important that we're really talking about everything that's going on throughout the day as much as possible. So laundry, another example, is to really describe textures. So towels versus sheets being smooth or rough, sizes and shapes, the similarities and differences. You could even talk about smell. I know that some of my laundry, if it hangs out in the laundry room for a little too long, it has a different smell than the stuff that makes it into the dryer right away. So again, there's lots of opportunities to talk about that and have them get involved. And it also allows them to gain some ownership in the actual home life, right? In those routines, and feel a sense of accomplishment if they're helping with folding items. Another really important piece that Dr. Kamptner also touched on is the importance of reading. We're lucky that many of our local libraries have remained open for drop-off and pickup of physical books, but also availability of ebooks. So it's a great way to be able to change out materials inexpensively. And during the times that you're reading, really promoting open-ended questions. This will help stimulate critical thinking, as well as imagination and creativity. So some examples might be, what do you think will happen next? Or why do you think so-and-so is feeling sad? Or what do you see in the picture? And just really allowing the opportunity for children to contemplate those questions and respond. In addition to reading, then also providing open-ended activities. There might be limited opportunities to go outside of the house. And so it's great to be able to use things that are kind of around the house that many people have. You don't have to go out and buy expensive things to have really meaningful activities for children. So some of those being just boxes, whether you're having things shipped to your house or it's empty food boxes, saving those and providing those to children to create whatever they'd like with some tape or crayons, or if you're feeling really brave, paint or markers, making sure that they're supervised if they're toddlers or preschoolers so that they don't end up, off tracking onto the wall. But they can create all sorts of things. They could create buildings, they could create a tunnel, an airplane, whatever their imagination wants to lead to. Another really simple but effective activity are just pulling out some pots and pans and a wooden spoon and allowing children to make music. You can sit there with them and create new rhythms, fast, fast, slow, and see if they can model those, or just allowing them to experience the different sounds different pots and pans make. Pretending to cook with them, or even stacking and balancing them. But be aware that that might get pretty loud if they fall. But it's a great opportunity to really practice balance and cause and effect with just really simple materials. And then the final one is a ball toss. So you could use balls, but you could also use just rolled up socks. And you could use a laundry basket, a bucket, some bowls, and just position them at different distances. And children can practice their gross motor skills, eye-hand coordination by trying to toss those into the different containers. So I wanted to touch on some positive guidance strategies. If you're spending more time with your young children and they are also feeling the stress of how things have changed for the pandemic, then you might see an increase of challenging behaviors. So positive phrasing is a great strategy to use. Really focusing on the desired behavior you want to see. Instead of saying no or don't, if a child's running, saying walk please, or if they're climbing on something that isn't safe, feet on the floor. Being able to tell them what they can do helps them inform them of what their actions need to be doing and help them understand faster than just telling them to stop a particular behavior. Then they don't really know which direction to go next. Considering the environment, just as we would in a classroom, lighting, sound, all sorts of different types of stimulation can be overwhelming to children. And so really thinking about, is there variation in what they're doing? They may be involved in some activities, but do they have some time to be calm and have quiet time? Is it really loud because of virtual experiences and things like that? Making considerations for that. If you're seeing a meltdown happen right before lunch every day, potentially it's because they might be getting hungry or tired. And so adjusting the schedule as needed, then you might see a reduction of some of those challenging behaviors. There are two more, I messages. We really want to reinforce using emotion language to help improve, self-regulation as well as emotional intelligence. And so I messages are a very simple way to say something like, I feel scared when you climb on the shelf because you might fall and hurt your body. Or I feel sad when you hit your sister because that hurt her body. So just being very clear with them about the connection between the emotion and the action. And then the last one being time in. So dedicated, special one-on-one time where children really get to choose what they're doing with you. And it's just a really great positive relationship building exercise. And it can be as little as 5 minutes, but empowering them to make the choice of what they want to do and really spending that time dedicated to them, distraction-free, really helps build, self-esteem as well as identity and building that positive, trusting attachment. So finally, I wanted to talk about some coping strategies. Sensory activities are a great way, or sensory materials are a great thing to be able to have for young children. Young children learn and are very tactile, learn through their senses. And so being able to have some of these around when children are feeling overwhelmed, they could go to a quiet area and kind of explore these different textures or, the cause and effect of sensory bottles. So you can see sensory bottles are very easy. You just use an empty water bottle and you can fill it with oil and some food coloring and water, or, any, glitter or materials that you might have laying around, buttons, things like that, to create a really neat sensory experience, as well as texture boards. So I thought one of them is really interesting. They used the tops of wipes to then input a particular texture. So it's working on fine motor skills because they have to open them up. And then there's all sorts of different textures like carpet, sandpaper, cellophane, all sorts of different textures that you can find pretty easily at a dollar store. Next slide. And finally, as Kelly or Dr. Campbell mentioned about mindfulness for adults, it's also incredibly important for young children, helping them with coping skills and self-regulation skills. So creating a feelings poster with their pictures of different emotions so that they can be in that activity, but then also refer to it later. And some mindfulness activities, sticking a stuffed animal on top of their belly and then watching them take a deep breath in and out and see if they can move that stuffed animal up and down. And while they're doing that, they're taking deep breaths. And then also tracing the hand. So being able to have your hand up and you inhale, breath in and out, and in and out. And what we know is that being able to focus in on a fine motor skill of tracing their fingers and taking those deep breaths, 3 to 5 deep breaths can help regulate heart rate, help us feel more centered, and that can go a long way for children as they feel stressed during a pandemic or might be feeling overwhelmed with virtual classes or whatever it might be. So hopefully some of these will be helpful that you can apply with your families. And I will pass it now over to Dr. Wong.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I thought I would just take a few minutes and touch on a topic that many of you might be experiencing as the pandemic has obviously turned your children's school experience upside down in a lot of ways, okay? And so, as schools have remained closed and so on, many of you are probably involved in your child's education in a way that you hadn't been in the past. So prior to the pandemic, most of us as parents would be involved, of course, with our children's homework in the afternoon, early evening times, have visits to the school settings for, back to school night, performances, etc. But of course, with the pandemic, many of you have become almost like full-time teachers, except we didn't particularly go to school to be that in many ways. So because of that change, you're getting to see your children with respect to their school experience in a very, very different light. And because you have so much more time invested in your child's educational experiences, oftentimes sort of being a primary teacher to them, it brings up a lot of potential questions for you. It brings up a lot of potential concerns for you, okay? And so what I thought we might do today is to just talk a little bit about those kinds of things, okay? So next slide. So as you become, okay, teachers to your child, especially for those of you that are in a school district where perhaps the schools are still completely closed, you might be wondering, okay, about any number of things that you're seeing as you work with your children throughout the day with respect to their school experience. Okay? Some of you might be wondering if your child has ADHD at this point. Some of you might be concerned with whether there's a learning disability or a learning disorder that might be present in your child. You might be concerned, that your kiddo is experiencing a lot of anxiety and that it's impacting their school experience. You might be wondering if your kiddo is just too stressed on a daily basis and what kind of impact this might be having on not only their academic performance, but just on their general well-being. And you might even be wondering about how all of these things could be impacting the family experience, the family routines, etc. And of course, if there are multiple children in school at the same time, you might be simultaneously okay, wondering about different things with each of your children and so on. So the main thing to try to keep in mind initially is it's not unusual whatsoever to be having these kinds of concerns or to be thinking about these kinds of concerns, because just today, the American Psychological Association published a short article just sort of highlighting the impact of the pandemic on children's academic outcomes as well as children's social emotional outcomes in the K-12 setting, with a particular focus on elementary school. And not surprisingly, the article highlighted how, of course, the pandemic has affected children's learning and their academic performance. So grades have been impacted, but likewise, children's social emotional well-being has been impacted because they're, of course, not having the same kinds of interactions as they've previously been able to have. Kids are not being able to spend time with one another in a variety of contexts. Extracurricular activities may not occur as they had occurred, so we might not see the youth sport things or the performance activities, the art activities, et cetera, okay? So again, it wouldn't be surprising, okay, if you're aware of these things, wondering about these things, sort of concerned about these things, because clearly across the country, there is an impact on your kiddo in terms of the pandemic and his or her academic experience at this point. Okay? So what I thought I'd do is to try to share a few thoughts with you on how we might work with this situation as the pandemic continues for the foreseeable future. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so what I did on this slide here is to try to just provide you with a few tips in terms of how we might approach, okay, the situations where we might be sort of concerned about how our kiddos doing in school and what that academic performance might be indicating and so on and so forth, okay? So first of all, as much as possible, try not to overreact. You know, as a parent myself, although my kiddo is a young adult now, I certainly still remember, you know, when he was going through school, any little thing that would pop up would be a potential concern and something that his mom and I would want to jump on and try to make sure that we figured out. And not surprisingly, in the context of the pandemic, we're probably as parents even more likely, okay, to jump on things or to be especially sensitive to things, okay? But very, very important to keep in mind, try not to overreact, okay? Try to be objective and look at the situation and identify what's going on, okay? And as you're able to do that, depending upon your child's particular school experience and whether there is a teacher involved or to a lesser extent a teacher involved, if possible, talk to your child's teacher, okay? Because obviously that individual or those individuals would have some contact with your kiddo, though indirect, okay? And maybe via our virtual learning world right now, but they can provide you with an alternative viewpoint, okay? So if your kiddo is involved in some level of virtual learning where a teacher's present, you sharing your concerns with the teacher allows the teacher to either share the same concerns with you or to say, oh, okay, that's not something that I see, but let's keep an eye on it. In other words, it's a great feedback loop, okay? So as much as you and I as parents might pick up on something when we're working with our own child, it's always good to know, okay, if the person on the other end or multiple persons on the other end are seeing and experiencing the same thing. Okay? And that's a very, very helpful piece of information to us that helps us to, as parents, regulate how we respond to a particular situation. Because of course, we're always very, very invested in how our kiddo's doing in school, okay? So beyond talking to your child's teacher or multiple teachers, if you truly are beginning to think that there are concerns like attention disorders or learning disorders or some kind of emotional adjustment concern, one of the first things that I would suggest is to certainly make an appointment with your child's pediatrician, okay? And talk with the pediatrician about what you're seeing, so that, again, it's someone else that can hear some of the things that you're seeing, some of the things that you're experiencing, and he or she, as the medical professional, can provide you with some feedback on whether that seems beyond the norm, or if it seems like it's a response that is in line and aligned with the particular stressors that we're all experiencing at this point. Okay? And if you're able to, speak with a developmental pediatrician in particular. Those are pediatricians who have more extensive training, specifically with children, and many of the developmental pediatricians have background in school-related concerns. So if you have that option with your medical group, for example, I would seek out a developmental pediatrician if at all possible. The alternative, of course, is if not a pediatrician, or maybe in addition to a pediatrician, talk to a child psychologist, someone who has background with children, and in particular, a child psychologist who has background with educational issues. Okay, so someone like me, okay, would be a great example of someone who has not only the developmental background, but also has the educational background, and can really help parents to sort of walk through what they're seeing, what they're experiencing, whether the things that they're experiencing are more than we would expect given the circumstances. And in that context, whether with a developmental pediatrician or our traditional pediatricians or with this child psychologist, consider whether a screener is possible. Screeners are partial evaluations of a child where we can sort of take little snapshots, okay, as opposed to creating a full picture of a child's educational profile. We're taking small snapshots of sort of critical areas of function and using those small snapshots to tell us whether we need to move forward with something that is more extensive in terms of an evaluation, or whether we're working with something that we have enough information to create some accommodations for, to create some alternative arrangements for, etc. Okay, so typically these screeners can be done by pediatricians, and there are some psychologists who are in private practice that are really, really good at doing these types of screeners, but they offer lots and lots of information. Okay, and then lastly, okay, if we sort of get all this background and we truly have something in front of us where it looks like there is definitely something going on educationally related, and we need to fully explore that possibility, request an evaluation, okay? And how this will happen will differ, okay? Depending upon whether you're in the public K-12 setting or whether you are in a private school setting, okay? So for the moms and dads who have their children in a private school, typically, private schools will not have a school psychologist on staff, but those private schools will have referrals to clinicians in the community who do these types of educational evaluations, and they'll refer you directly to that psychologist who will do the evaluation, come to the diagnostic conclusions based on the testing data, and then of course provide a report that you can then take back to your child's school, where we can then develop that accommodation program that will support your child's educational experience. If you're in a public school, of course, okay, we have mechanisms in place, okay, for children to receive evaluations within the public K-12 setting. How that's happening right now in the middle of the pandemic is going to vary from one school district to the next school district because of what's happening with how they're providing education. So if we have a school district that is completely still closed down, they'll probably be handling evaluations in a different way. If we have a school district that is at least doing some of the schooling on campus, they might have a different protocol for doing these evaluations. So in the public K-12 setting, you will have to look a little bit more deeply, or you'll have to look a little bit more deeply into how these formal evaluations will actually occur. But it's certainly something to follow up on if, again, you're at a point where you have enough information to say, okay, we have something here, education related, that we would really, really like to formally follow up on because you believe that there's a negative impact on your kiddo's educational experience, okay? So hopefully those tips, those suggestions are of help to you. But again, just know that as moms and dads who have become teachers in many ways to your child or children, it's definitely not an unusual thing to start wondering if there are various educationally related concerns that you might need to address. But know that there are many, many supports out there that are available to you to help you to do so. Okay, so with that, and given the opportunity that you all have had a chance to hear each of us talk a little bit about different areas of potential concern, I believe we'll open it up to Q&A here so that we can address your questions.
Great. Well, thank you, Eugene, and thank you to all four of our panelists today. The information it was wonderful and helpful, and it amazes me. I've worked with all of you for so long. We talk all the time, and I still learn more stuff every time I listen to you talk. So thank you for sharing all that you've shared. We do have a number of questions, and I also want to remind our webinar audience, you can continue to submit questions through the chat feature that I will direct to our panelists as we go. But we have a range of questions. Some of them are a little bit more to specific speakers. Others could be answered kind of by multiple panelists. So I will just read the questions, and I'll leave it to all of you to decide if you have something you want to add on that particular one. The first one is one that, in fact, crosses over a couple topics areas. A question states, I have found that when my partner comes home from work, less quality time is being spent together because my child wants to also be involved. So how can I manage both my partner's needs and my child's needs so that they don't feel neglected?
Well, I just throw out there, Kelly, you want to go ahead?
No, go ahead, Laura.
I was just going to suggest that, first of all, talk about it. And, this is just a conflict of needs. And my suggestion would be kids' needs are immediate, and address that first, and talk over with your partner about another time, perhaps after the child's gone to bed, to have your quality partner time.
Yeah, and I would just add in, it doesn't need to be exclusive. You can have family time in a way that, but yeah, reminding the partner too that it's like you have needs too. You appreciate that quality time just as much as they do. It's not like it's up to you to fulfill everyone's needs, the child and the partner. It's up to the two of you to do that. So you can share in some quality time with the child, and then yes, like Dr. Kamptner said, when the time permits, you have your time together as well. To the extent possible, if you can, carve out some couple time, if you do have a sitter or a family member who's safe, and you know that they're safe, whether they're in your quarantine bubble, whether that's once a month or once a week, however often you can do it, it would be great if you can do that, even just to get out for a walk or something like that. But to the extent that that's not possible, you build it in at home when you can.
We have a second question that's actually related to that, so I'm going to piggyback on it while we're here. And that is that another question asks, I love time with my partner, but I also need space. How do I create space from my partner in this time when we're together all the time?
I've heard a common complaint is that people get hurt feelings because they do need that independent time, which is perfectly normal to want that. But the partner gets hurt feelings when it's requested, and they feel it's like against the partner that it's being requested, and it's not. Just remember that you can look up the inclusion of others in self. If you look at that on Google, Art Aaron's work, he has these circles of overlapping independence and interdependence. And so for some couples outside of the COVID pandemic, there's a healthy degree of overlap between the two. They have their independent life, but they have their shared life as well. And then with COVID, it's become too much overlapping where their whole life is being shared. And so we're in this unnatural time, and a time that's not organic, it's not typical. And so recognizing that stress of the time period is impacting the relationship is important, and to have that discussion explicitly and overtly with your partner to say that this is not something against you that I need my time, maybe even showing them the graph and say, this is how we used to be. We just need to carve out a little bit of that independence to be healthy with one another. How can we even have anything unique to talk about with one another when our entire lives are overlapping? And so just getting in some of that self-care time, or a little bit of virtual time with friends. And then you come back to your partner, you say, guess what so-and-so said? And you actually have things to talk about. So it's normal and healthy and will make your relationship thrive, but helping your partner understand it's not against them. It's beneficial to them that you're doing it. It's a normal thing. So, and a common struggle.
And I think another way to do that is to go out for your solo exercise time, go for a walk, take a bubble bath, whatever it is.
Another question we have refers to something, Dr. Wong, that you mentioned. The question is, I know Dr. Wong has provided us with information about how parents can support their children when it comes to school. I work with young children. Would any panelist like to share how I can support young children and or their parents during this Bridge Academy distance learning time?
Amy, you want to jump there in first?
No, go for it.
Yeah, so I can give you some general tips, because my work tends to be more K-12. So if you're asking about the sort of early childhood years, I think Amy is especially adept at addressing that. But certainly, even as I've worked with the various school districts during the COVID time here, with the virtual world, what I've suggested is trying to really emphasize those sort of informal contacts. There of course are those times when we're doing class as teachers online and we're trying to teach and so on and so forth, a particular content area. And within the virtual world, I think it's hard to create a sense of connectedness with our students. And so I've suggested to a number of teachers in San Bernardino County that even just reaching out via an email to their students to just say hello and to put a happy thought in the email. Likewise, to the families, send an email, a quick email to the moms and the dads and just say, hey, how's everything going? Just wanted to check in. Is Johnny or is Jamie doing okay, et cetera. Those things seem to do lots in terms of keeping the professional connected to the family and to the student in particular. So maybe that's some version of that or some variation of that might work for you as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you're saying. And, being able to, even if doing a weekly like newsletter or something like that, where you're kind of highlighting the activities that have been done virtually, or providing suggestions for ways that parents could extend things outside of virtual space, or for example, activities that could be done away from screen time, since, ideally with young children, we want to minimize the amount of screen time, but that's very counterintuitive to the life that we're currently living, where screen time is absolutely a part of young children's lives who may be connecting in that way with their schools. So being able to do a newsletter or something like that. I also think with regard to the children, like if their cameras are on, really being able to take temperature of what are their facial expressions? What do they look like? Do you see many of them engaged or not? And, just as we have to think quick on our feet with young children in a classroom, being able to change up the activity or things like that. So hopefully I understood the question appropriately. If it was more parent focused in helping support children, then, let me know, Dr. Agers, and then I can adjust my response as well.
I think you captured it, actually.
Okay. Good.
Shifting gears a little bit, someone else has asked, do you think separation anxiety with children and parents is going to be a problem in the future?
I guess if I could just ask for clarification, is the audience person asking in terms of like a clinical separation anxiety, or just sort of as children go back to school?
Yeah, I think more generally, as we kind of move out of this period that we've gone through, what that might look like.
Yeah. So my thought on that is, in all likelihood, when we can go back to school in some kind of normal fashion that resembles what things were prior to the pandemic, there's going to be an adjustment period. Children, as well as moms and dads, are going to have a noticeable adjustment to that transition. And I think this goes back to something that perhaps all of us mentioned in our brief conversations. It's going to be really, really important at that point to establish the new routine. So knowing that transition's coming, as it happens, create some kind of new routine about going to school. Okay, much like everyone probably had a routine prior to the pandemic. We get up in the morning, we do certain things, we go to the car or the bus stop or whatever the case might be. But I would anticipate on creating a new routine to try to minimize that separation anxiety.
I agree. And for young children in particular, I think building out kind of expectations of like what they can anticipate for their day, and kind of talking about that ahead of time. For some young children, it's very age appropriate for them to have separation anxiety anyways, but that likely could be increased for children that maybe are outside of that developmental period. And so, even doing things that could help them have reminders throughout the day. So whether that's including a little message in their lunch pail that they might be taking to school, or, allowing them to bring a picture of the family or something that reminds them of home, can be something that makes them feel connected to home and remember kind of, okay, I'm getting dropped off by so-and-so, I'm getting picked up by so-and-so. And if they know those things ahead of time, that can also help them, with that transition.
And there's some wonderful children's books out there on that have the theme of separation and what school's about, and reading those to children as young as 2 years of age. So Owl Babies is a classic, but there are a lot out there. And reading those books, talking about feelings, taking the child to the school physically, if you can, going and meeting the teacher before the actual day also helps the child to acclimate to a new school.
That's all great. Thank you. And just a note to folks who are listening, we will, when we post the recording of this on YouTube, we'll be sure to include a list of some of those resources and books that our panelists have referred to for your reference. We've been getting a lot of questions, so we're not gonna really do them all individually, but a lot of questions about stress related to the online environment and just, whether it's anxiety around that the kids are experiencing around being on Zoom and being in this online classroom. And so I'm wondering, and I realized too that this again applies to different ages of children in different ways. So could you all speak to, suggestions that you have for parents in helping their children manage the anxiety of this online learning environment and being on Zoom and the, just the anxiety that comes with that?
Kind of start with the younger years, in that, I think an important piece that Dr. Kamptner and I both spoke about is the importance of acknowledging emotions. and that there are aspects to the stress of virtual learning that impacts young children who may be, touching base with their childcare classroom or pre-K classroom, and being able to, as a parent, acknowledge the emotions. We say that there are no positive or negative emotions. Just it's important to acknowledge them. So if a child's feeling frustrated because maybe the internet is going in and out, or it's hard to hear their teacher, being able to acknowledge that and say, I see that you're frustrated. When I get frustrated, I take a deep breath, or I count to 10, or, if they get cut off all of a sudden, then, saying, do you want to maybe write an email to your teacher, or be able to give them an alternative of something that they can do to help them during those emotional times is important. And I'll let the other panelists also add.
And one of the things that I've always liked doing with children, because it allows them to not be sitting, but to be sort of physically active in some way, is yoga that's appropriate for children. And I believe on Instagram and Facebook, I believe the Institute has posted some examples of yoga poses that are good options with children because they're easy to do, but they also just create a situation where the body naturally has to calm down a little bit, because when you're engaged with yoga poses, you're really tuning down that sympathetic nervous system, activating the parasympathetic nervous system, which will alleviate some of that anxiety that gets built up with being online.
I would also recommend, as I mentioned, just staying in really close contact with the child's teacher. A lot of the frustrations that families are experiencing come from not having clarity about various assignments. And so, again, communication is really important. Another suggestion would be, if your child is having, and I'm thinking of school-age children here, difficulty with a particular subject, there are wonderful educational supply stores in most larger towns, and getting additional activities and workbooks and whatnot can also help. And the other thing I think that's important to remember is that our brains are wired to function best when we're in connection with others. And this digital world just isn't cutting it. And it's frustrating for everybody. And so I think we're seeing a lot of this on every front, certainly with children's peer relationships, with schooling, and for us trying to connect with our loved ones in various parts of the country and the world.
Yeah, those are all great points. And I'm going to follow up with one specific to the point, Laura, you were just speaking about, because we had a question that said, my child spends a lot of time online playing video games with friends socially. I usually try to limit video game time, but this is their main outlet for being with friends. And I'm not sure how to know what's too much.
Yeah. One of the things that we've been recommending to families is to kind of relax some of what your typical expectations and rules were before COVID, because children have so few outlets these days, and the peer video game playing is one way that they can be with kids. The other is basically video chatting. So this is one of the things I think, just let the little stuff go, relax some of your standards. Try to not have them on video games 8 hours a day, have a balance, set limits, and make sure that they have connection time with people in the household and others in your quarantine bubble.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, we're just about at about 15 minutes over, so I think we'll have to wrap up things here. But I wanted to say my sincere thank you to each of the panel members for sharing your time and your expertise with us today. So again, I want to thank you to all our attendees as well. So thank you for participating in today's webinar, hosted by the Institute for Child Development and Family Relations at California State University, San Bernardino, providing guidance for parents and families based on science and best practice since 2002. Have a wonderful day and be well.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Take care, everybody.